It was one of those slow Sunday mornings where everything felt quiet, almost too quiet. Emily had rolled out of bed late, still in her soft pajamas with tiny blue stripes, her hair loose and a little messy from sleep. The kettle on her stove hummed as it heated the water for tea, and sunlight slipped through the blinds in long golden stripes across her small apartment. It wasn't a glamorous morning, but it was peaceful, just the way she liked it. She didn't have any plans, no appointments, no expectations. It was the kind of morning where you expect nothing and welcome the stillness. Then came the sound. A knock, firm, deliberate, and completely unexpected. Emily froze, the sound echoing through her quiet space, sharp enough to make her pulse quicken. She rarely had visitors. Her friends usually texted before stopping by, and her family lived too far away to surprise her. She glanced at the clock. Too early for a delivery, too odd for a stranger. Another knock followed, this one slightly louder, and her heart gave a little jump. She looked down at herself, tugging at the sleeves of her worn pajamas. They weren't anything embarrassing, just casual and comfortable, but standing in front of someone in them felt strangely vulnerable. She considered ignoring the knock, but something about it kept her moving toward the door. It wasn't just a knock, it carried a weight, like someone had chosen this moment carefully. Her footsteps were light against the wooden floor as she crossed the small living room, brushing her hair back with one quick sweep of her hand. She didn't know what to expect on the other side. For a split second, she thought it might be an emergency, maybe someone looking for help. She hesitated with her hand on the doorknob, listening, wondering if the knocking would come again. Silence. Then, just as she thought they had left, there came a third knock. Steady, patient but firm, Emily took a breath, turned the lock, and opened the door. There he was, Daniel, her neighbor from down the hall. She'd seen him plenty of times before, sometimes passing in the hallway, sometimes at the mailbox, always with a polite smile and a quiet hello. He was the kind of person who carried himself with calmness, never too loud, never too pushy. But now, standing on her doorstep, there was something different about him. His shoulders seemed tense, his eyes were focused, almost intense, like he had come here with a purpose he couldn't push aside. For a moment, Emily forgot about her pajamas. She forgot about the tea, the morning, everything else. All she could think was, why him? Why now, Daniel? She said, her voice soft, trying to hide her surprise. He held a small paper bag in his hand, like he had come from the cafe down the street. But his grip on it was tight, and the way he looked at her wasn't casual. It wasn't the look of someone dropping off a package by mistake or making small talk. It was something heavier, something she didn't understand yet. I need to tell you something, he said finally, his voice steady but low, as if he'd rehearsed the words in his head 100 times. Emily blinked. She hadn't expected anything close to this. Sunday mornings weren't for confessions. Sunday mornings were for tea, quiet music, maybe reading a book on the couch. And yet, here he was, breaking into her quiet world with words that sounded far too serious for the moment. The kettle whistled in the kitchen, breaking the silence for a second, but neither of them moved. The sound faded into the background, leaving only the weight of his words hanging in the air between them. She wanted to ask him what he meant, why he was standing here on her doorstep while she stood half awake in striped pajamas, but the look in his eyes kept her still. They weren't casual eyes anymore. They were the kind that made you stop, the kind that made you realize something important was about to happen. Her mind raced. Maybe he needed help with something. Maybe something had gone wrong. Or maybe, just maybe, this was about something she had secretly wondered about before. There had been moments, short, fleeting, when she had caught him glancing at her in the hallway, moments when she thought his polite smile lasted a second too long. But she had always brushed it off as nothing. Neighbors didn't complicate things. Neighbors stayed neighbors. And yet here he was, standing outside her door, his hand still holding that small cafe bag, his voice carrying something far beyond the casual greetings they usually exchanged. Emily didn't know what to do. She didn't know what he was going to say next. All she knew was that the ordinary rhythm of her morning was gone. replaced with something unexpected, something that made her chest tighten with both curiosity and nervousness. The air felt different now, charged, waiting. Daniel took a slow breath, as if trying to find the courage to continue. His eyes flickered briefly to the floor before meeting hers again, steady and unwavering this time. "Emily," he said, his voice firmer now. "I can't keep pretending. Not anymore." Her fingers tightened on the doorframe. Whatever he was about to say, she knew it would change something. Maybe everything. The world outside her apartment door was the same. The hallway, the quiet hum of the building, the morning light spilling in through the window at the end of the corridor. But for Emily, time felt suspended, caught between the life she had before this knock and the one she was about to step into. And as she stood there in her pajamas, hair undone, heart racing, she realized she might remember this moment for the rest of her life. Emily's hand stayed tight on the doorframe, her knuckles pale as she stared at Daniel. She could still hear the kettle whistling in the kitchen, but she couldn't move to turn it off. It felt like the sound was miles away, faint compared to the weight of his voice. "I need to tell you something," he said again, slower this time, as if he wanted her to truly hear it. She swallowed hard. Daniel had always been the quiet one, the man who nodded politely when their paths crossed. He carried groceries, sometimes walked his dog, and always seemed to keep a respectful distance. Never once did she imagine him standing here speaking like this. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Daniel's grip on the paper bag shifted. She noticed the faint tremor in his hand. He wasn't calm. He wasn't casual. He was nervous. His jaw tightened, and for a second he closed his eyes, as if choosing his words with care. "I've been keeping something to myself," he said finally, "and it's been eating at me. Every time I see you, every time I pass you in the hallway, I tell myself to stay quiet. But today, I couldn't anymore." Emily's chest tightened. This wasn't about a package. This wasn't about the cafe bag in his hand. Something deeper was spilling out, and she wasn't ready for it. Her first instinct was to laugh, to break the tension, to say something light-hearted that would return them both to the safety of small talk. But when she looked at him again, she couldn't. His expression was too raw, too real. "Daniel," she began, hesitating. You're scaring me a little. What are you trying to say?" He exhaled, steadying himself. "I'm trying to say that pretending has been harder than telling the truth. And the truth is, I notice you, more than I should. More than just as a neighbor." Her breath caught. She hadn't expected that. Not here, not now. She looked down at her striped pajamas, the loose thread at the cuff, the slippers on her feet. This wasn't the version of herself she wanted anyone confessing to. She felt exposed, caught off guard, like she was standing under a spotlight with nowhere to hide. "You shouldn't," she murmured, but the rest of her words tangled on her tongue. Daniel shook his head. "I know. Believe me, I've told myself the same thing 100 times. I've tried to ignore it, to act like it's nothing. But it's not nothing, Emily. It's never been nothing." Her mind raced back to all the small moments she had brushed off as coincidence. The extra second of eye contact in the hallway, the time he offered to hold the elevator even though it was already closing, the way he said her name when they bumped into each other at the grocery store. She thought it was politeness. She thought it was neighborly. But now, hearing him like this, those moments felt different. "Why today?" she asked suddenly. "Why now, Daniel? Why are you telling me this, while I'm standing here in pajamas?" He let out a short, nervous laugh, shaking his head. "Because if I didn't, I never would. I woke up this morning and told myself, enough. No more waiting for the perfect moment, because there isn't one. I don't care if you're in pajamas. I don't care if I sound like a fool. I just couldn't keep this inside anymore." Emily leaned back against the doorframe, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to shut the door and pretend this never happened. Another part wanted to pull him inside, sit him down, and demand answers to every question racing through her head. Instead, she whispered, "This is a lot." Daniel nodded. "I know. And I don't expect you to say anything back. I just needed you to hear it." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, full of things neither of them knew how to speak aloud. Emily's thoughts pulled in two directions. On one hand, she was cautious, even afraid. On the other, something inside her stirred, a small, unsteady spark that hadn't lit up in a long time. She studied him quietly. His brown hair was slightly messy, as though he had rushed out of his apartment without much thought. His shirt was simple, his shoes worn. He didn't look like someone rehearsing a grand declaration. He looked like someone who had finally reached the edge of what he could hold back. Emily's voice trembled. "Do you realize what you're doing? You're changing everything just by saying this." Daniel's eyes softened. Maybe everything needed to change. Her stomach nodded. She wasn't ready for this conversation. Not today. Not in this way. And yet a part of her was almost relieved. Relieved that the quiet tension she had felt but never named finally had words. Relieved that she wasn't the only one who sometimes felt their brief encounters carried more weight than they should. But relief was tangled with fear. She had been hurt before. Trust didn't come easily. And here he was, asking for something unspoken, something fragile, without even realizing the storm he was walking into. Emily turned her gaze toward the floor. She wanted to protect herself. She wanted to stay in control. But her voice betrayed her, coming out softer than she intended. "I don't know if I can handle this, Daniel." He didn't step closer. He didn't argue. He simply stood there, steady, his hand still clutching the cafe bag like it was his anchor. "You don't have to handle anything right now. Just let me be honest. That's all I'm asking." The way he said it made her chest ache. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't pressure. It was truth, laid bare at her doorstep on a Sunday morning she thought would be ordinary. The kettle in the kitchen finally quieted, leaving the apartment in stillness again. Emily's world had shifted, tilted into something unfamiliar, and she didn't know where it would land. She looked up at him, searching for something she couldn't name. And in that moment, standing in her doorway with sunlight spilling behind him, she realized one simple fact: whatever came next, there was no way to go back to how things were before this knock. Emily didn't know what to say next. Her thoughts spun like loose pages in the wind, scattered and impossible to catch. Daniel's words still hung in the air, heavy and trembling with meaning. But before she could form a response, he lifted the small paper bag in his hand, holding it out to her like a peace offering. "I brought this for you," he said quietly. She blinked, confused. Her mind was still caught in his confession, so his words landed strangely. "For me?" He nodded, and for the first time since knocking on her door, his expression softened just a little. "From the cafe you like. Vanilla latte and a croissant. I hope I got it right." Emily froze. Her breath caught. She hadn't told him about her favorite order. She never mentioned it, never shared it, and yet somehow he knew. Her hand hesitated before reaching for the bag. The warmth of the latte seeped through the paper, heating her fingers. She slowly opened it and saw exactly what he had said. Her Saturday ritual. The thing she looked forward to at the end of every long week, sitting neatly inside. How did you know?" she asked. Daniel shifted, his gaze dropping for a moment. "I've seen you there. Saturday mornings, usually around 10. You sit by the window, always with a book. I never wanted to interrupt, but..." I noticed. Her heart skipped. The way he said it wasn't intrusive. It wasn't the voice of someone who spied or crossed a line. It was gentler, almost shy, as if he had carried this small piece of knowledge carefully, waiting for the right time to show her he'd been paying attention. Emily looked down at the bag again, torn between surprise and something she didn't want to name. She had always thought of herself as invisible in those small routines, just another face in the cafe crowd. But to know that someone noticed, that someone remembered, made her chest ache in an unfamiliar way. "I didn't go today," she murmured, almost to herself. "That's why I went," Daniel said quickly, his words rushing out. "I thought maybe you weren't feeling up to it. I thought maybe I could bring it to you instead." Her lips parted, but no words came. She was overwhelmed, not just by the gesture itself, but by what it meant. It wasn't about coffee or pastries. It was about someone seeing her when she wasn't trying to be seen. Someone noticing the little things that made up her world. For years, Emily had carried herself with quiet caution. After her last heartbreak, she had built walls. Strong ones. She had convinced herself no one really looked closely anymore. No one really cared enough to notice details. But here stood Daniel, holding proof that she was wrong. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered. "I know," he said softly, "but I wanted to." She felt her throat tighten, her heart racing faster than she wanted to admit. She tried to steady her breath, tried to remind herself that this was just her neighbor, her quiet, polite neighbor. But it no longer felt like that. Not with the cafe bag warm in her hands. Not with his eyes steady on hers, waiting for a reaction. A long silence filled the doorway. She thought about sending him away, thanking him politely, and closing the door before things grew heavier. But the thought of shutting him out when he had just bared so much honesty made her hesitate. Something inside her urged her not to end this moment so quickly. Her voice came out softer than she intended. "Do you want to come in?" Daniel's brows lifted slightly, surprised, but he nodded. "Only if you want me to." She stepped back, letting him enter. The air inside her apartment felt different now, charged with something new, something fragile. He walked in quietly, careful with his steps, as if afraid of disturbing the calm of her space. Emily placed the cafe bag on the small table near the couch. Her tea was still sitting on the counter, forgotten. The kettle had gone silent, but the scent of steam still lingered in the air. She turned to face him, her arms folded across her chest, not out of anger, but as if to hold herself together. Daniel stood across from her, his hands shoved into his pockets now, his shoulders a little tense. The quiet stretched between them, thick and unspoken, until Emily finally broke it. "Why would you do this?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. "Why would you notice something so small and then bring it to me?" His eyes lifted, meeting hers directly. There was no hesitation, no confusion in his gaze this time. "Because you matter to me, and I didn't know how else to show it." Her breath caught again. Simple words, direct, but they landed like a weight in her chest. No one had said that to her in a long time. Not with such quiet certainty. Not without expecting something in return. She turned away for a moment, staring at the sunlight slipping across her living room floor. Her pulse raced, and her thoughts clashed between fear and something dangerously close to hope. She didn't want to admit it, but his gesture touched her in ways she couldn't push aside. Emily picked up the latte, holding it close, the warmth calming her hands, but not her heart. She sipped it, the familiar sweetness washing over her, and for the first time in years, she felt something melt inside her walls. When she looked back at Daniel, his expression hadn't changed. He wasn't pushing, wasn't rushing, wasn't asking her for anything more than this moment. That steadiness, that patience was what unsettled her most. It was easier to deal with people who demanded. But Daniel? He simply offered. "You don't even know me," she said suddenly, the words sharper than she meant. "I know enough," he replied, his tone calm but firm. "I know you love vanilla more than caramel. I know you walk slower when you're tired, and faster when you're distracted. I know you carry your keys in your left hand even though you're right-handed, and I know you don't deserve to feel invisible." Her lips parted, but nothing came out. His words hit deeper than she wanted to admit. She had spent so long convincing herself she didn't need anyone to notice her. And yet, hearing that he had seen her so clearly made her feel alive. Emily's chest rose and fell, her emotions tangled. She wasn't ready to trust, wasn't ready to fall, but she also wasn't ready to dismiss what stood in front of her. Daniel wasn't just a neighbor with a bag of coffee and pastries. He was someone who had seen her when no one else did. And that realization scared her more than anything. Emily stood there with the warm cup in her hands, unsure of what to do with everything Daniel had just said. Her heart beat too fast, her thoughts too scattered, and the silence between them felt like it was pressing against her chest. The truth was, she wanted to ask him 100 questions. Why her? Why now? Why would he risk saying all this when they barely knew each other beyond polite exchanges? Finally, she spoke, her voice tight but steady enough. "Daniel, this doesn't make sense. We're just neighbors. That's all we've ever been." His eyes didn't waver. That's the line I've been forcing myself to stay behind. But I can't anymore. Her fingers curled tighter around the cup. She wanted to dismiss it, to remind herself that this was crazy. But his tone wasn't reckless or careless. He spoke like someone who had wrestled with his feelings and finally lost the fight. You don't just walk into someone's apartment and say something like that, she said sharply. You're right, he admitted quickly. And I wouldn't have if I wasn't certain. I know it sounds sudden, but it's not sudden for me. I've been holding this in for months. Emily's chest tightened. She turned away from him, walking toward the window, needing space from the intensity of his gaze. She looked outside at the quiet street below, cars lined neatly along the curb, the world moving on as if nothing in her life had just changed. But inside her apartment, everything felt different now. She finally whispered, You don't know me, Daniel. Not the real me. I'd like to, he replied, his voice calm but certain. She closed her eyes for a moment, fighting the emotions rising in her chest. His words weren't aggressive, but they were steady, and steady was dangerous. Steady meant he wasn't playing games. Steady meant he was serious. Turning back toward him, she forced herself to meet his eyes. Do you know how many times I've been told things like this? Do you know how many promises I've heard, only for them to break? Daniel's expression shifted, a flicker of pain passing through his features. I'm not here to promise you something perfect. I can't. All I can give you is honesty. And the truth is, I don't want to keep pretending that I only see you as a neighbor. That's the line I swore I wouldn't cross, but I already stepped over it the moment I started caring. Her stomach nodded. The way he said it left no room for doubt. This wasn't about charm or trying to win her over with grand gestures. This was real, and that terrified her more than anything. Daniel, she began, but her voice faltered. He stepped forward just one careful step, closing some of the distance between them. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't trying to invade her space. He was just close enough for her to feel the weight of his presence. I don't need an answer from you, he said softly. Not now, not even tomorrow, but I need you to know the truth, because pretending has been tearing me apart. Emily looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't perfect. His hair was slightly out of place, his shirt wrinkled from being worn since morning, but his eyes held something rare. Something that wasn't trying to impress, only to be understood. She took a slow breath. You're asking me to trust you, and I don't trust easily. I'm not asking you to, he said quickly. I'm asking you to just see me. That's all. The words landed like a weight in her chest. She remembered all the times she had convinced herself she was invisible, unnoticed, unimportant. And now, here was someone standing in her living room, saying the exact opposite without hesitation. The air grew thicker, the silence stretching again. Emily wanted to push him away, to tell him he was wrong, to retreat back into the safe bubble she had built around herself. But something inside her wouldn't let her. Something inside her wanted to believe him, even if it scared her. Finally, she said, You don't understand the risk you're taking. Daniel tilted his head slightly. Maybe not, but I'd rather risk telling you how I feel than spend another day wondering what might have been. Her breath caught. It was too much, too honest, too close to the things she had buried deep inside. She sat down on the edge of the couch, setting the latte aside, her hands trembling slightly. He stayed standing, giving her space, not pushing further. She appreciated that. His restraint, his patience. It was almost harder to face than if he had been demanding. You should leave, she said suddenly, though her voice cracked in the middle. He hesitated, his brows furrowing. For a moment she thought he might argue, but instead he nodded slowly. If that's what you want. Her heart twisted at how easily he accepted it. Not with bitterness, not with frustration, just quiet acceptance. He walked toward the door, his steps calm but heavy. When he reached it, he paused and looked back at her. I'm not trying to make your life complicated, Emily. I just couldn't keep it inside anymore, whether you want me as just your neighbor or something more. I'll respect that. But I needed you to know. Her chest ached as she watched him reach for the doorknob. She wanted to call out, to stop him, to tell him she wasn't ready, but she also didn't want him to go. Yet her voice failed her, locked somewhere between fear and longing. The door clicked softly as he pulled it open. Sunlight from the hallway spilled into her apartment, casting a glow across the floor. And just like that, the space between them grew wider. Emily pressed her hands together in her lap, her heart pounding. She knew the moment the door closed, her world wouldn't feel the same again, because Daniel had stepped over the line. And deep down she knew she had too. The door didn't close. Not right away. Daniel stood there with his hand on the knob, his shoulders tense as though he was fighting with himself. Emily watched from the couch, her hands gripping her knees, waiting for him to leave. But instead of stepping out, he turned slightly, his eyes still heavy with something unsaid. "There's one more thing," he said quietly, almost like he was confessing to himself. "Something I should have told you before, but I never had the courage." Emily's heart tightened. She wanted to say no, to stop him, to tell him she couldn't handle any more revelations in one morning. But her voice didn't come. She just sat there, silent, her eyes fixed on him. Daniel let go of the doorknob and stepped back into the room, closing the door behind him. The sound echoed softly, final, like a choice had been made. He stood there for a moment, his hand brushing against his temple as if gathering his thoughts, then looked at her with a kind of raw honesty she wasn't prepared for. "I wasn't always like this," he began. "I wasn't always the man you see in the hallway, the one who smiles politely, keeps his distance, and hides behind small talk. I used to be different. I used to believe in love without hesitation, and I gave everything to the wrong person." Emily felt her throat tighten. She knew this wasn't going to be light or easy. He moved toward the chair opposite her and sat down, his posture tense but his gaze steady. 3 years ago I was engaged. We had plans, marriage, a house, a future we thought was unshakable. But one day it all crumbled, not because of distance, not because we didn't love each other enough. It ended because she walked away without warning, no explanations, just gone. Emily's chest ached at the bluntness of his words. He wasn't dramatic, wasn't trying to make her pity him. He was simply telling the truth. "I spent months trying to understand why," he continued, his voice quieter now. "I replayed every memory, every conversation, wondering what I missed. And in the end, I realized I couldn't fix what someone else chose to break. That's when I decided I would never let myself fall so carelessly again." He paused, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, his knuckles pale. His silence carried more weight than his words. Emily could see the pain that still lingered, hidden but not gone. She leaned back slightly, her own heart tangled in emotions she didn't want to name. It explained so much. His calm exterior, his careful nature, the way he seemed to hold himself back whenever they crossed paths. He wasn't distant because he didn't care. He was distant because caring had cost him everything once before. Daniel finally looked up, his eyes locking onto hers. "I didn't want to risk it again. I didn't want to feel that kind of loss again, so I told myself I'd keep my life simple. Work, home, polite smiles to the people around me, nothing more." Emily's fingers curled into her palms. "But then?" she asked softly, already knowing the answer. His lips curved into a faint, almost pained smile. "Then I met you." The words struck deep, sharp, and unrelenting. She felt her stomach tighten, her chest ache with something she couldn't push away. "You weren't supposed to matter," he admitted. "You were supposed to just be the neighbor I nodded to in the hall. But every time I saw you, I noticed more. The way you carried books with you. The way you smiled politely at strangers but saved the real ones for rare moments. I noticed how careful you were, how guarded. And I think maybe that's why I saw you. Because you were hiding too." Emily's throat burned. She didn't want to admit it, but he was right. She had been hiding behind routines, behind walls, behind the safety of not letting anyone too close. And somehow he had seen straight through it. "Daniel," she began, her voice shaky. He leaned forward slightly, not enough to close the space between them, but enough to show he was listening, waiting. She struggled to find her words. "You don't know what you're asking of me. I'm not ready for anything like this. I've been through my own heartbreak, and it nearly broke me. I don't know if I can risk that again." His gaze softened. "I'm not asking you to risk anything right now. I'm not asking you for promises or answers. I just wanted you to know why I'm here. Why I can't keep acting like this is nothing. Because it's not. Not for me. Her hands trembled in her lap. She hated that his honesty made her chest ache in a way she couldn't ignore. She hated that she wanted to believe him. But most of all, she hated how much she related to his pain. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet filled the room again, heavy but not empty. It was the kind of silence where two people were fighting their own battles, but still tethered together by the same thread. Emily finally whispered, "You shouldn't have told me this. It would have been easier if you hadn't." He gave a small nod, as if he already knew she would say that. Easier, yes, but easier isn't the same as right. Her heart stung at his words. She knew he was right. Easier meant staying safe, staying behind her walls, but easier also meant staying lonely. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression calm again, though his eyes still carried the weight of everything he had shared. "I've already lost once by staying silent in the wrong moments. I didn't want to repeat that mistake with you." Emily swallowed hard, blinking quickly as emotions crowded her chest. She wanted to push him away, to protect herself. But she also wanted to hold on to this moment, fragile as it was, because it was real. Daniel rose slowly from his chair, his movements measured. "I've said what I needed to say. Whether you let it mean something or nothing, that's up to you. I'll accept it either way." Her lips parted, but no words came. She watched as he stepped toward the door again, each step calm but heavy with finality. This time, when his hand touched the knob, Emily's chest tightened in panic. She didn't call out, didn't stop him, but she wanted to. More than she wanted to admit. The truth was, Daniel wasn't just carrying his past anymore. He had placed it in her hands, asking her silently what she would do with it. And Emily wasn't sure if she was strong enough to hold it, or brave enough to let it go. Emily didn't sleep that night. The quiet of her apartment felt louder than ever, every shadow reminding her of the words Daniel had spoken. She lay on her bed staring at the ceiling, her chest heavy with confusion. He had given her honesty, something she thought she wanted from people. But honesty, she realized, came with responsibility. He had placed a truth in her hands, and now she didn't know what to do with it. By morning, the exhaustion showed in her face. She stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair, seeing the pale skin and tired eyes staring back. "Get a grip," she whispered to herself. But the reflection didn't listen. At work, she was distracted. She sat at her desk, staring at the screen but seeing nothing. Her coworkers laughed, chatted, moved around her, but she felt disconnected. She thought about Daniel's voice when he said, "You weren't supposed to matter." She thought about the way his eyes softened when he admitted, "I've already lost once by staying silent." Why did those words matter so much? Why did they press against her chest like an ache that wouldn't fade? On her lunch break, Emily walked outside. The cool air hit her face, clearing her mind for a moment. She found a bench near the park and sat, clutching her coffee. She told herself she didn't owe him anything. He had chosen to open up, not her. She could easily step back, put her walls higher, and pretend none of this ever happened. But deep down, she knew she couldn't. Not because of him, but because of herself. For years, she had avoided these moments that asked her to be vulnerable. After her last heartbreak, she swore she'd never cross that line again. She had been in love once, deeply, foolishly, and when it ended, it tore through her like a storm. The memory of Matthew came uninvited. His smile, his promises, the way he used to hold her hand as though nothing could go wrong. And then the phone call, the abrupt ending, the cold words. "I don't see us working out anymore." It had been years, but she still remembered standing in her kitchen, clutching the phone, her chest hollow. She had loved him with everything she had, and he had walked away as though it meant nothing. That was when she built her walls. That was when she told herself she would be safe, even if it meant being lonely. And now Daniel had knocked on her door, carrying his own broken past, daring her to look at hers. Emily closed her eyes on the park bench, her fingers tightening around the coffee cup. She didn't want to be weak again. She didn't want to feel that helpless pain return. But something inside her whispered that not all stories ended the same way. that maybe, just maybe, people like Daniel were worth the risk. When she returned home that evening, she noticed the hallway felt different, quieter. He wasn't outside his apartment. No sounds, no presence. She unlocked her door and stepped inside, her chest unexpectedly hollow at the thought he might be keeping his distance now. She tried to distract herself, cooking dinner, washing dishes, turning on music, but everything reminded her of the conversation. Finally, she sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. The silence pressed too heavily on her. She picked up her phone, stared at Daniel's name in the building directory app, her thumb hovering over the call button, but she couldn't do it. Not yet. Instead, she set the phone down and whispered, "I'm not ready." Days passed, but he didn't knock again. Each morning, she glanced at her door before leaving for work, half hoping he'd be there, half dreading it. Each night, she paused in the hallway, wondering if he'd step out. But he never did. The distance felt heavier than she expected. It wasn't relief. It was disappointment. One evening, after a long day at work, Emily found herself standing in front of his door without meaning to. She stared at the wood, her hand lifted but trembling before it touched the surface. She wanted to knock, to tell him she hadn't forgotten what he said, to admit she was scared but still listening. But the memory of her past heartbreak froze her in place. Instead, she whispered, "Not yet," and walked away. Inside her apartment, she sank onto the couch, frustrated with herself. Why was it so hard? She had spoken about strength for so long, but strength wasn't what she felt now. She felt trapped between the past that hurt her and the future that might hurt her again. That night, she dreamed of her younger self, carefree, hopeful, unafraid to love. She woke with tears in her eyes, realizing how much she had buried that version of herself. The following morning, she couldn't take it anymore. She pulled out a notebook and began to write. Not a letter, not a message for Daniel, but her own truth. She wrote about Matthew, about the heartbreak, about the walls she built. She wrote about the loneliness she had carried ever since. And then she wrote about Daniel, his honesty, his pain, and the way his words had touched her more deeply than she wanted to admit. The writing flowed until her hand ached. When she finally stopped, she read the pages and realized she had never spoken these things aloud, not even to herself. For the first time, she saw her fear on paper, and it wasn't as strong as she thought. She folded the pages and set them aside, her chest lighter. That evening, she stepped into the hallway and saw him, Daniel, unlocking his door. He looked up at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. For a moment, neither moved. Then he gave a small nod, polite, almost distant, as if he was keeping his promise not to push her. Emily's heart pounded. She wanted to run back into her apartment, but instead she whispered, "Daniel, wait." He paused, turning back toward her. Her voice trembled, but she didn't back down. "I need to tell you something. Not now, not all of it, but soon. I don't want you to think I didn't hear you." His eyes softened, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Take your time," he said quietly. "I'll be here." And for the first time in years, Emily felt something shift inside her. Not love yet, not trust yet, but the courage to believe that maybe her story wasn't finished. Maybe she could still write a different ending than the one she feared. She went back into her apartment with her heart racing, her walls trembling. It wasn't an answer, not yet, but it was a beginning. The days after that small exchange felt different. Emily carried Daniel's words with her everywhere, like an invisible thread pulling at her thoughts. "Take your time. I'll be here." It wasn't a demand, it wasn't pressure, it was patience. And that patience was what shook her the most. She had expected him to walk away, to close himself off after exposing his pain. Instead, he waited quietly, giving her space but reminding her with his presence that he hadn't forgotten. Emily felt a nervous energy building inside her. At work, she caught herself smiling at nothing, then quickly looking down so no one noticed. At home, she found herself pausing at her door, listening for footsteps in the hallway. Sometimes she thought she heard him, but when she peeked out, the hallway was still. That strange tension, hope mixed with fear, grew with each passing day. One evening, as she walked in carrying grocery bags, she almost collided with him outside his door. He was just getting back, his jacket slightly wet from the rain. For a moment, they both froze, surprised by the sudden closeness. "Sorry," she said quickly, stepping aside. "No need," Daniel replied with a faint smile. His voice was calm, steady, but his eyes lingered on her like he wanted to say more. Emily hesitated, then spoke before she lost the courage. "I've been thinking about what you told me," he nodded, waiting. She took a deep breath. "It scared me, not because of you, but because I realized I've been hiding for a long time, longer than I want to admit." Daniel's expression softened, his eyes quiet but warm. "You don't have to explain." "No," she interrupted gently. "I want to. I need to." They stood in the hallway, rain tapping softly against the windows, and Emily felt the weight of her own silence pressing on her. She didn't want to hold it anymore. "My last relationship ended badly," she began, her voice trembling. "I gave everything I had to someone who walked away without warning. And when that happened, I promised myself I'd never be that vulnerable again. I built walls so high I thought no one could reach me." Daniel's eyes stayed fixed on her, steady, patient. "But then you knocked on my door," she whispered, "and suddenly, all those walls felt weaker than I thought. I hate that it scares me, but I also hate how much I want to trust you." Silence followed, not empty, but thick with meaning. Daniel didn't rush to respond. He let her words hang in the air, let her breathe through them. Finally, he said softly, "Thank you for telling me." Emily's chest tightened. It wasn't grand or dramatic, just simple gratitude. And somehow, that meant more. They carried her groceries inside together, and for the first time, Daniel stepped into her home without tension between them. The air felt different, lighter. He helped her place bags on the counter, their movements brushing close but not too close, careful but natural. As they unpacked, their conversation flowed more easily. They talked about little things, books she had stacked by the window, his favorite coffee shop downtown, the rainstorm that ruined his morning commute. And though the words were ordinary, the way they looked at each other wasn't. Every laugh, every smile carried a weight beneath it, an unspoken understanding that something had shifted between them. When the groceries were put away, they sat on the couch, each with a mug of tea. Emily felt the nervousness return, but it was gentler now, softened by the comfort of his presence. Daniel broke the silence first. "You know, I used to think patience was weakness, that waiting meant wasting time. But after everything, I've learned that patience is the only way to rebuild trust, both in yourself and in others." Emily looked at him, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "Do you really think trust can come back? After it's been broken?" He paused, then nodded. "Not the same way. Not the same shape, but yes, it grows differently. Maybe slower, but it can still be strong." His words wrapped around her like warmth she didn't know she needed. She realized then that she wasn't alone in her fear. He carried his own, and yet he still believed in something better. The evening stretched on. They spoke until the city lights outside dimmed and the quiet of the night deepened. Emily felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of possibility. But when Daniel finally stood to leave, her heart tightened. She didn't want him to go, not yet, and that realization frightened her as much as it thrilled her. At the door, he hesitated. "Thank you for letting me in tonight," he said gently. Emily swallowed hard. "Thank you for waiting for me." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air felt charged, the kind of pause where everything could change with a single step. But neither moved closer. Instead, Daniel gave her one last steady look and whispered, "Good night, Emily." She closed the door after him, leaning against it, her heartbeat racing. She knew something important had happened, something she couldn't deny anymore. The walls she built were still there, but cracks had formed. And through those cracks, light was beginning to enter. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the way he listened, the way he didn't push, the way his patience made her braver than she thought she could be. For the first time in years, Emily didn't dream of the past. She dreamed of a future, but with that dream came a question she couldn't ignore. Was she ready to let herself step into it?